He had $3.2 billion, controlled an empire, and thought he owned his wife. But he made one fatal mistake. He hired an ex-Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're watching from anywhere around the world, drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing where our Penthouse Diaries family is tuning in from. And if stories about justice catching up with the ultra-wealthy are your thing, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. What you're about to witness isn't just another tale of billionaire bad behavior. This is about the night a CEO locked his 8-month pregnant wife outside during one of the worst storms in New York history. 60-mile-per-hour winds, freezing rain, temperatures dropping fast. She was wearing nothing but a thin maternity dress. Her bodyguard, Daniel Rodriguez, had a choice to make: follow his employer's orders and let her freeze, or throw away his career to save her life. That decision would trigger a chain of events that would destroy a $3 billion empire, expose massive money laundering operations, racketeering schemes that reached international borders, and land one of America's most powerful men in prison for life. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. The bodyguard didn't just save her. He systematically documented months of abuse, built an underground network of military veterans, and orchestrated the complete destruction of a man who thought money made him untouchable. Now, let me take you inside the golden towers of Manhattan's financial district, where Richard Hawthorne was about to learn that some things, and some people, simply cannot be bought. Richard Hawthorne's office sat on the 67th floor of Titan Industries headquarters, a glass fortress that dominated Manhattan's skyline. At 42, he commanded a logistics and technology empire worth $3.2 billion. Forbes called him the supply chain king. Wall Street Journal praised his revolutionary business model. But those glossy profiles never mentioned what happened behind closed doors. 5 years ago, Richard had married Dr. Victoria Bennett in what the media dubbed Manhattan's wedding of the century, 200 guests at the plaza. A reception that cost more than most people's homes. Victoria, then 28, was already making headlines as one of Mount Sinai Hospital's youngest and most talented pediatric surgeons. She'd saved dozens of premature babies, pioneered new surgical techniques, and was on track to become chief of pediatric surgery by 35. That career ended 6 months after the wedding. "My wife doesn't need to work," Richard had announced at a charity gala, his hand gripping Victoria's wrist just tight enough to leave marks under her diamond bracelet. "She has more important responsibilities now." Those responsibilities? Being available whenever Richard needed a trophy to display, standing silent at business dinners while he negotiated deals, smiling for photographers at events she hadn't chosen to attend. Her medical degree, 8 years of training, hundreds of thousands in student loans she'd proudly paid off herself, became worthless paper in a drawer. The isolation happened gradually, then suddenly. First, Richard suggested she take a sabbatical from surgery. Then her car mysteriously developed problems every time she tried to visit friends. Her phone would lose service during important calls. Her credit cards, even her personal ones, suddenly required his authorization. "It's for security," he'd explained, showing her threatening letters from a disgruntled former business partner. "Someone in my position makes enemies. I need to know where you are, who you're with. It's because I love you." Love. That's what he called the tracking devices in her jewelry. Love was the reason she needed permission to have lunch with her sister. Love was why the household staff reported her every movement, every phone call, every visitor. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed, trusting in their future, believing in his promises, had transferred her substantial savings into joint accounts. Joint in name only. Every withdrawal needed his signature. Every purchase required approval. The woman who'd once performed 12-hour surgeries, who'd held dying children's hearts in her hands and given them life, now had to ask permission to buy groceries. Richard's control extended to every detail. Her wardrobe was selected by his assistant, designer clothes that he felt appropriate for his wife. Her schedules managed by his team, charity events that benefited his business connections, dinners with his clients, silent appearances at board meetings where she served as decoration. The household staff, all 23 of them in their Westchester mansion, were his employees first, her jailers second. The chef reported what she ate. The drivers logged every destination. The housekeepers searched her room daily, looking for what she never knew. Hidden phones, escape plans, evidence of the independence she'd once treasured. But Richard's most effective prison wasn't the mansion's walls or the staff's surveillance. It was the systematic destruction of her self-worth. Every decision she'd made as a surgeon was questioned. Every achievement was minimized. Every memory of her former strength was rewritten as weakness. "You were lucky at the hospital," he'd say over dinner, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "They felt sorry for you. A pretty face opens doors, but it doesn't mean you deserve to walk through them." The bruises were never where anyone could see. A grip too tight on her upper arm. A shove that sent her into furniture. Accidents, always accidents. She was clumsy, he'd tell anyone who asked about the fading marks. Pregnancy made women unsteady. Everyone knew that. By year 3, Victoria had stopped trying to leave. Where would she go? Her bank accounts were empty. Her medical license had lapsed. Her colleagues had moved on. Her friends had stopped calling after too many declined invitations. Her family lived across the country, and Richard monitored every call, every email, every text. The perfect victim, trapped in a perfect cage, glistening with diamonds and designer clothes that might as well have been chains. But Richard had made one miscalculation in his perfect prison design. He'd hired Daniel Rodriguez as Victoria's bodyguard, thinking a disciplined military man would follow orders without question. He'd assumed that a soldier's loyalty could be bought just like everything else in his world. He'd assumed wrong. Daniel Rodriguez had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan learning the difference between following orders and doing what was right. He'd lost brothers in arms to know that some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. And he was about to prove that not everyone in Richard Hawthorne's orbit could be purchased, controlled, or intimidated. The storm was coming. Richard just didn't know it yet. Daniel Rodriguez didn't look like someone who'd changed the course of 3 lives. 6'2", built solid from years of military training, with quiet eyes that had seen too much. At 38, he carried himself with the controlled precision of a man who'd learned that the difference between life and death often came down to staying calm when everyone else panicked. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him about real power, and it had nothing to do with money. He'd led convoys through hostile territory, protected villages from insurgent attacks, and earned a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle while under heavy fire. But his military career ended on a dusty road outside Kandahar when an IED tore through his convoy. 2 of his squad brothers died instantly. Daniel survived with shrapnel in his left shoulder and memories that visited him at 3 a.m. Back home, private security seemed like a natural transition. His reputation was spotless. Former clients included foreign diplomats, Fortune 500 executives, and a Supreme Court justice. He didn't talk much, didn't ask questions beyond security protocols, and had never lost a client. That's why Richard Hawthorne hired him. "My wife needs protection," Richard had explained during the interview, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. A former business partner, James Kellerman, has been making threats, angry about a deal that went south. You know how these things go. The folder contained emails, voicemails, even photos of their Westchester mansion taken from the street. Kellerman seemed unstable, possibly dangerous. The job was straightforward. Protect Victoria Hawthorne, maintain a security presence, report any suspicious activity. The pay was exceptional. $200,000 a year, plus benefits. What Daniel observed in his first week told a different story than the one he'd been hired for. Victoria Hawthorne moved through her own home like a ghost, trying not to disturb the living. She spoke in measured tones, never above a whisper. She flinched when doors opened too quickly. She wore long sleeves in summer, turtlenecks when the fashion called for open necklines. Classic signs Daniel recognized from combat zones, not from enemy fire, but from civilians trapped in occupied territories. His job description said bodyguard, but what he witnessed was closer to warden. Richard had installed a tracking app on Victoria's phone that he checked obsessively. The house staff weren't employees, they were informants. The security cameras Richard claimed were for protection covered every room except his private office, recording Victoria's every movement. Daniel started documenting everything in a small notebook he kept locked in his vehicle. Date, time, incident. Victoria asking to visit her mother, denied. Victoria's credit card declined at a bookstore, later learning Richard had canceled it as punishment for speaking too long with a neighbor. The bruise on her wrist shaped exactly like a large hand's grip. Then came the pregnancy announcement. Daniel had been standing post outside Richard's home office when he heard it through the door. Pregnant? Richard's voice was ice. You did this on purpose. To trap me. Richard, we're married. This is our child. The sound of glass breaking, then silence. When Victoria emerged, there was wine on her dress and fear in her eyes. She saw Daniel, straightened her shoulders, and walked past as if nothing had happened. But her hands shook for the next hour. The pregnancy changed Richard's behavior patterns. He hired nurses to monitor Victoria for the baby's health, installed more cameras for safety, required daily reports on her food intake, sleep schedule, bathroom visits. He spoke about the child as his heir, his legacy, his property, never as their child, never with love. Daniel's notebook became notebooks, photos taken discreetly on his phone, audio recordings when Richard's rage echoed through the mansion, financial documents photographed when left carelessly on desks, documents that showed money moving through shell companies, transactions that didn't match any legitimate business model, connections to offshore accounts in countries known for banking secrecy. By month 6 of his employment, Daniel had enough evidence to destroy Richard Hawthorne several times over. But he stayed, because leaving meant abandoning Victoria to whatever Richard had planned once the baby was born. And Daniel Rodriguez had never left anyone behind. His evidence folder grew thicker. His resolve grew stronger. The decorated soldier who'd fought overseas was now fighting a different kind of war, against a different kind of enemy. But nothing could prepare Daniel for what would happen on that November night when the storm rolled in. November 23rd started with weather warnings across the Northeast. The National Weather Service called it potentially catastrophic, a nor'easter bringing hurricane-force winds, freezing rain, and temperatures plummeting toward dangerous levels. By 6 p.m., most of New York had shut down. Roads were closed. Emergency services warned residents to stay indoors. At 7:43 p.m., Victoria's phone rang. Daniel was stationed in the security office, monitoring the mansion's perimeter cameras as rain lashed against the windows. Through the surveillance feed, he watched Victoria answer her phone in the living room. Her face went white. Her free hand moved protectively to her 8-month pregnant belly. Mom? Her voice cracked. What do you mean cardiac arrest? Which hospital? Eleanor Bennett, Victoria's 64-year-old mother, had collapsed at her Boston home. She was in critical condition at Massachusetts General, might not survive the night. Victoria needed to get there. Now. Daniel watched Victoria hurry toward Richard's study, her desperation visible even on the grainy security monitor. He switched camera feeds to follow her movement. Richard was at his desk, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in hand, his 4th by Daniel's count. Please, Richard, it's my mother. She might not make it through the night. Richard didn't look up from his laptop. We've discussed this. You don't leave without my permission. I'm not asking to go shopping. My mother is dying. Your mother has been dying for years. Diabetes, high blood pressure, always something. This is just another manipulation, the doctor said. Richard's laugh cut through her words. Cold, sharp, dismissive, the doctor said. Just like the doctor said you needed to keep working. Just like the doctor said you were capable of making your own decisions. Doctors say many things, Victoria. Doesn't make them true. Richard, please, I'm begging you. Begging. He finally looked up, his eyes glassy from alcohol. Good. You should beg. Maybe if you'd learned your place earlier, we wouldn't have these problems. The answer is no. Your mother chose to live in Boston. You chose to marry me. Choices have consequences. Victoria stood there for a moment, 8 months pregnant, her mother possibly dying 300 miles away, her husband denying her basic human compassion. Then something shifted in her expression, determination replacing desperation. "I'm going." She turned and walked out. Daniel heard her footsteps through the mansion, heading toward the garage. He pulled up the garage cameras just in time to see her trying each vehicle. The Mercedes keypad wouldn't respond. The Range Rover completely dead. The Bentley wouldn't start. Richard had disabled them all. Victoria's sob echoed through the empty garage. She tried calling a taxi, an Uber, anything, but Richard had already called the local companies using his influence to ensure no one would pick up his wife. Small town, big money. Everyone knew not to cross Richard Hawthorne. Daniel watched Victoria return to the house, soaking wet from just the short run from the garage. She confronted Richard in the main foyer, no longer begging, demanding. "You disabled the cars. You called the taxi companies. You're preventing me from seeing my dying mother." Richard stood up, swaying slightly, whiskey still in hand. "Preventing? I'm protecting you. It's dangerous out there. You're 8 months pregnant. What kind of husband would I be if I let you drive in this weather? Then drive me yourself. I've been drinking. That would be irresponsible. You planned this. You knew the storm was coming. You knew." Richard grabbed her arm, his fingers digging deep. "I know you've forgotten who makes the decisions here. I know you've forgotten who owns everything you touch, everything you wear, everything you are." He dragged her toward the front door. Victoria tried to pull away, but Richard was stronger, fueled by alcohol and rage. He threw open the massive oak door. Wind and rain exploded into the foyer. "You want to leave?" He shoved her onto the front steps. "Then leave. Walk to Boston if you care so much. Show me how independent you are." Victoria stumbled, caught herself against the porch railing. "Richard, stop. The baby—" "My baby will be fine. You are the problem. You always have been." He stepped back inside and slammed the door. The electronic locks engaged with a definitive click. Daniel watched in horror through the security monitors as Victoria pounded on the door, screaming to be let in. She was wearing only a thin maternity dress and house slippers. The temperature outside was 34 degrees and dropping. Wind gusts were reaching 60 miles per hour. The freezing rain was coming sideways. Inside, Richard poured another whiskey and walked upstairs to his bedroom, leaving his 8-month pregnant wife locked outside in a potentially deadly storm. Daniel had a choice. His employment contract was clear: protect Victoria from external threats, follow Richard's household rules, maintain professional boundaries. Letting her back in would mean defying his employer, losing his job, possibly facing legal action. But Daniel had made harder choices in Afghanistan. He'd decided between following orders and saving lives, between career and conscience, between what was legal and what was right. At this moment, Daniel had two choices: follow his employer's orders or follow his conscience. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments, but first, watch what this ex-Navy SEAL did next. Daniel grabbed his emergency kit from the security office: military-grade first aid, thermal blankets, emergency heating packs. He pulled on his tactical weather gear and sprinted into the storm. Training kicked in: assess, adapt, act. The wind nearly knocked him sideways, but he'd navigated worse in Afghan sandstorms. He found Victoria collapsed by the garden gate, barely conscious, her body temperature dropping dangerously. She was clutching her belly, her face contorted in pain. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong. Early labor. Hypothermia. 8 months pregnant. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in good weather. In this storm, with emergency services overwhelmed, an ambulance could take hours. Daniel made another choice, the only choice a soldier with honor could make. He was taking her to the hospital himself. Richard Hawthorne be damned. Daniel lifted Victoria into his reinforced SUV, a vehicle he'd personally modified with military-grade suspension and all-terrain tires. In Afghanistan, he'd driven through ambushes and sandstorms. Tonight, those skills would save 2 lives. The main road was already a disaster zone. Trees had fallen across Route 9, power lines whipped through the air throwing sparks, and abandoned cars sat jackknifed in ditches. What should have been a 40-minute drive to Westchester Medical Center was looking impossible. Daniel switched to tactical driving mode, the same mindset that had gotten his convoy through hostile territory. Every obstacle was a problem to solve, not a reason to stop. Tree blocking the road? Mount the curb, use the sidewalk. Power line down? Calculate the safe distance, navigate around. Zero visibility? Trust your training, not your fear. Victoria was drifting in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat, her body shaking from hypothermia. But in her delirium, she started talking, and what she revealed made Daniel grip the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "The accounts," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "He's been moving money, millions, through shell companies. I saw the documents. Panama, Cayman Islands, Switzerland." She paused, struggling to focus through the pain. His business partners, they don't know. He's been skimming from every deal. Government contracts too, charging them for services, never delivered. Ghost employees on federal projects. Daniel's phone was recording everything, mounted on his dashboard for navigation. Every word was being captured. "There's more," she continued, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The FDA investigation, his company's medical supplies, fake certifications. He knew they were defective, sold them anyway. To hospitals, to the military." Her voice faded as another contraction hit. Daniel checked his watch. Contractions were 5 minutes apart now. The baby was coming whether they made it to the hospital or not. He keeps everything on drives, hidden in his office, behind the Monet painting, evidence of everything. He records his calls, his meetings, says it's for leverage. A massive oak tree crashed down 20 feet ahead. Daniel yanked the wheel hard right, tires screaming, threading between the falling trunk and a stone wall with inches to spare. His military training kept his heart rate steady even as his passenger screamed. "Hold on, Victoria. 3 more miles. Those 3 miles took 27 minutes. Daniel drove through parking lots, across a golf course, even through someone's backyard. When the road became completely impassable, he called ahead to the hospital, alerting them to prepare for an emergency delivery with hypothermia complications. They screeched into the emergency bay at 9:47 p.m. A medical team was waiting, led by Dr. Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Victoria, soaking wet, hypothermic in active labor, with clear signs of prolonged stress and neglect, and her expression hardened. "Get her 2 or 3. Now, call the NICU team. We're doing an emergency C-section." As they wheeled Victoria away, Dr. Morrison turned to Daniel. "How long has she been in this condition?" "The hypothermia, about an hour. The rest? Months." "You're her bodyguard?" "Yes." "Then you know there will be questions. Medical reports. Documentation." "I have everything documented, doctor. Everything." Dr. Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. "There's a waiting room down the hall. We'll update you when we can." Daniel didn't go to the waiting room. Instead, he stepped outside into the storm and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Rebecca Stone, a lawyer he'd served with in Afghanistan who'd gone on to become a JAG officer and now ran a private practice specializing in financial crimes and protective orders. "Rebecca, it's Daniel. I need you at Westchester Medical Center. Now, bring everything you need to file emergency protective orders and custody papers. Yes, in this storm, it's life or death." The second call was to Richard Hawthorne. "Your wife is at Westchester Medical Center," Daniel said when Richard answered. "She's in emergency surgery. The baby's coming." Richard's response would later become key evidence in the trial. She made her choice. Whatever happens is on her head. If she dies, she dies. Just make sure my heir survives. The mother is replaceable. My bloodline isn't. Daniel kept recording. "To be clear, sir, you're saying you don't care if your wife dies?" I'm saying she should have stayed home like I told her. Actions have consequences, Rodriguez. You'd do well to remember that. You're fired, by the way, and I'll make sure you never work security again. Understood, sir. One more thing. This conversation has been recorded. Richard hung up immediately. Daniel stood in that storm, rain washing over him, and made a decision that would change everything. He opened his phone's contacts and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 2 years. Thomas Chen, nicknamed Ghost in their unit, now one of the best cybersecurity experts in the country. Ghost, it's Rodriguez. I need a favor. A big one. Yeah, I know what time it is. I need you to dig into someone. Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Titan Industries. How deep? All the way to hell if that's where it leads. Inside the hospital, baby Hope entered the world at 10:23 p.m., 3 pounds 4 ounces, fighting for every breath. Her mother was unconscious, her body fighting hypothermia and blood loss. Richard just made the biggest mistake of his life. He underestimated a brotherhood that never leaves anyone behind. While Victoria fought for her life in the ICU and baby Hope struggled in the NICU, Thomas Ghost Chen was doing what he did best: digital archaeology. From his home office in Virginia, surrounded by multiple monitors and military memorabilia, Ghost began excavating Richard Hawthorne's past. What he found in the first hour alone made him call Daniel back immediately. Rodriguez, you need to hear this. Richard Hawthorne's been running a massive financial scheme. I'm looking at transactions dating back 10 years. Money laundering through real estate, art purchases, cryptocurrency. We're talking hundreds of millions in unreported income. Daniel put him on speaker. Rebecca Stone had arrived and was listening intently. There's more, Ghost continued. He's been defrauding his own investors. Fake valuations, phantom subsidiaries, cooking the books. The SEC's been sniffing around, but he's been paying people off. I have the wire transfers to prove it. What about government contracts? Rebecca asked. That's where it gets worse. He's been billing the Department of Defense for equipment never delivered, charging for premium materials, delivering substandard ones. There are emails where he literally jokes about it with his CFO, says the government is too bureaucratic to notice. Rebecca was already taking notes. That's racketeering. Federal charges. Multiple counts. While Ghost continued digging into Richard's digital footprint, Daniel activated his military network. These weren't just former soldiers. They were a brotherhood forged in combat, bound by shared sacrifice. First call, Maria Gonzalez, former Navy corpsman, now working as a trauma nurse at Mount Sinai. Danny? Whatever you need, Hermano. Protection detail at Westchester Medical. Mother and newborn, both critical. Husband is the threat. On my way. I'll bring backup. Second call, Jerome Washington, former Air Force Security Forces, now running a veteran-owned security firm. Rodriguez, heard you were out of the game. I need surveillance teams. Pro bono. It's important. For you, done. I've got 6 guys who need purpose more than payment. We'll rotate shifts. Third call, Lisa Park, Marine veteran turned social worker, specialized in documenting financial abuse cases for court proceedings. Daniel Rodriguez calling me at midnight? This must be serious. Life and death serious. I need someone who knows how to build an airtight case. Someone who understands chain of custody for evidence. Send me everything you have. I'll be there by morning. By dawn, an informal command center had formed in the hospital's family conference room. Rebecca Stone was drafting emergency protective orders, while Lisa Park cataloged Daniel's months of documentation. Photos, recordings, financial documents. Ghost was feeding them information remotely, having uncovered a labyrinth of financial crimes. 57 shell companies, Ghost reported over video call. Money flowing from Titan Industries to offshore accounts. He's been stealing from pension funds, manipulating stock prices, insider trading on a massive scale. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division is going to have a field day. But here's where it gets worse, Ghost added. He's been selling defective military equipment. Body armor that doesn't meet specifications, medical supplies with forged FDA certifications. He knew they were faulty. There are emails where he discusses hiding the test results. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. That's endangerment of military personnel. Multiple federal agencies will want him. Already made some calls, Ghost said. My contacts at the Bureau are very interested. But Richard wasn't sitting idle. By 8 a.m., he'd held a press conference outside Titan Industries headquarters. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he painted himself as the concerned husband, the worried father. My wife has been struggling with mental health issues throughout her pregnancy, he told the gathered media. Last night, during a severe episode, she left our home against medical advice. I'm deeply concerned for her welfare and that of our child. I'm seeking immediate custody to ensure our baby receives proper care. He'd hired Morrison, Krensky & Associates, the most ruthless family law firm in New York. They filed for emergency custody within hours, citing Victoria's mental instability and reckless endangerment of the child. But Richard had made a crucial error. He didn't know Ghost had already accessed his secure servers. He didn't know that 3 different veterans were documenting every word of his press conference, analyzing his body language, noting the inconsistencies. Maria Gonzalez stood guard outside Victoria's room, her trained eyes scanning every person who approached. Jerome Washington's team had cameras on every entrance, every exit. Lisa Park was interviewing hospital staff, building a timeline that would demolish Richard's narrative. He's used to buying outcomes, Rebecca said, reviewing Richard's legal filing. Expensive lawyers, paid experts, influenced judges. But he's never faced something like this. Like what? Daniel asked. A unit that won't break. A brotherhood that can't be bought. He's fighting military veterans who faced real enemies, not boardroom opponents. You don't leave your people behind, and you don't let bullies win. Richard thought his billions could buy any outcome. He was about to learn that some things can't be bought. Honor, loyalty, the fierce protection of those who've sworn to defend, and the truth, especially when it's documented, verified and backed by people who stared down death and didn't blink. The war for Victoria and Hope's freedom had begun. Richard Hawthorne just didn't know he'd already lost. Ghost's investigation had opened a digital Pandora's box. By Tuesday morning, he'd traced money flowing from Titan Industries through a web of shell companies to banks in Cyprus, Malta, and the Cayman Islands. But the real bombshell came when he cracked into Richard's private server. Daniel, you need to see this, Ghost said over encrypted video call. He's been running a massive Medicare fraud scheme, billing for medical equipment never delivered to hospitals, charging for premium supplies, shipping counterfeit ones. We're talking about hundreds of millions in false claims to government healthcare programs. Rebecca Stone nearly dropped her coffee. That's federal healthcare fraud. The False Claims Act alone could put him away for decades. It gets worse, Ghost continued. He's been creating phantom employees on government contracts, billing the Department of Education for 500 IT specialists on a school modernization project. Only 50% actually exist. The rest are fake names with the salaries going to his offshore accounts. I have the payroll records and the bank transfers to prove it. While Ghost compiled the financial evidence, Daniel's security footage was telling its own story. Months of recording showed a clear pattern. Richard's controlling behavior escalating week by week. The cameras he'd installed to monitor Victoria had become witnesses against him. Lisa Park had organized everything chronologically. Look at this progression. January, he's monitoring her calls. March, he's controlling her food. June, he's locked her out of her own bank accounts. September, he's disabled her car. This is textbook coercive control. But the medical records were the most damning. Dr. Morrison had run comprehensive tests on Victoria when she arrived. We found traces of mercury in her blood, she told Rebecca in a sworn affidavit. Chronic low-level exposure. Not enough to cause immediate symptoms, but enough to cause confusion, fatigue, memory problems. Someone was poisoning her slowly. The media caught wind of the story by Tuesday afternoon. A financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal had been investigating Titan Industries for months, suspicious of their impossible profit margins. When Ghost anonymously sent her a sample of evidence, she knew she had the story of the year. Former employees started coming forward. Richard's executive assistant revealed he kept 2 sets of books. His CFO, granted immunity, admitted to helping falsify SEC filings. A warehouse manager confirmed they'd been shipping empty containers to hospitals while billing Medicare for full loads. Richard's own brother, Christopher, gave an exclusive interview to CNN. "I've watched my brother destroy everything he touches for 40 years. I stayed quiet because he threatened to ruin me financially. But when I heard what he did to Victoria, to a pregnant woman in a storm, I can't stay silent anymore." Business partners scrambled to distance themselves. The board of Titan Industries held an emergency meeting, voting unanimously to remove Richard as CEO and cooperate fully with federal investigators. Stock price plummeted 60% in one day. Trading was halted twice. By Tuesday night, federal agents had warrants for Richard's arrest on 47 charges including money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion, healthcare fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York announced they were seeking asset forfeiture of everything Richard owned. The arrest came at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning. Richard was in his study, trying desperately to move money to accounts federal agents hadn't found yet, when they breached the door. FBI, IRS criminal investigation, and Department of Health and Human Services investigators all wanted a piece of him. "Richard Hawthorne, you're under arrest for violations of the False Claims Act, money laundering, racketeering." The agent read charges for 3 full minutes. Richard, still in his monogrammed silk pajamas, was handcuffed in his own foyer, the same foyer where he'd thrown Victoria out into the storm just 4 days earlier. As they led him out, news cameras were waiting. Someone, Ghost would never admit it was him, had tipped off every major network. The image went viral within hours. Richard Hawthorne, billionaire CEO, being perp walked in pajamas and handcuffs. By noon, he was in federal custody wearing an orange jumpsuit, his bail denied due to flight risk. His passport had been seized, his assets frozen, his empire in ruins. But the investigation was just beginning. The FBI found the hidden drives Victoria had mentioned, right behind the Monet painting. They contained recordings of Richard discussing his crimes, planning the fraud schemes, laughing about stealing from taxpayers. He'd kept them as insurance against his partners, never imagining they'd be used against him. The U.S. Attorney, Carolyn Foster, held a press conference that afternoon. "This case represents one of the most extensive corporate fraud schemes we've ever prosecuted. Mr. Hawthorne didn't just steal money. He defrauded programs meant to help sick Americans, stole from education funds meant for children, and treated the federal government like his personal ATM." Victoria watched the news from her hospital bed, finally conscious after 3 days. Hope was still in the NICU but improving. Daniel stood by the window, keeping watch as he always had. "It's over," Victoria whispered. "No," Daniel replied. "Now the real work begins. Rebuilding your life, getting real justice, making sure he never hurts anyone again. If you think Richard's arrest was the end, you're wrong. The real justice was just beginning. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because what happens next proves that sometimes the system does work when good people refuse to give up." The empire Richard Hawthorne spent 20 years building had fallen in less than a week, but from its ashes, something far more powerful was about to rise. The trial of United States v. Richard Hawthorne began 6 months later in the Southern District of New York. District Attorney Carolyn Foster, known for taking down corrupt politicians and corporate criminals, led the prosecution with methodical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Foster began in her opening statement, "this case is about a man who believed his wealth placed him above the law, who stole from taxpayers, defrauded investors, and treated the federal government like his personal piggy bank. We will show you exactly how he did it, document by document, crime by crime." The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Ghost testified via secure video link, walking the jury through the digital evidence, fake invoices, phantom employees, shell companies with no actual operations. The CFO, having flipped for immunity, explained how they'd created an entire parallel accounting system to hide the fraud. But the most devastating testimony came from Christopher Hawthorne, Richard's own brother. Richard always believed rules were for other people, Christopher told the court. Growing up, he'd steal from our parents' business and blame the employees. In college, he paid others to take his exams. When he took over our father's shipping company, the first thing he did was fire everyone who knew how it actually operated and replace them with people who wouldn't ask questions. Did you ever confront him? The prosecutor asked. Once. He told me I could be his ally or his enemy, but enemies don't stay in business long. I had a family to feed. I stayed quiet. I regret that every day. When Richard took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance sealed his fate. Against his lawyer's advice, he insisted on testifying, convinced he could charm the jury as he charmed investors for years. These are standard business practices, he claimed about the shell companies. Creative accounting, he called the Medicare fraud. Protecting assets, he said about hiding money offshore. But under Foster's cross-examination, his composure cracked. When shown the security footage of him locking Victoria out in the storm, he actually smiled. She was being dramatic. Women get emotional during pregnancy. I was teaching her a lesson about respect. The jury's expressions said everything. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One shook her head in disgust. The verdict came back in 4 hours, guilty on all 47 counts. Money laundering, racketeering, healthcare fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Richard Hawthorne was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, with consecutive sentences ensuring he would never walk free. But the story didn't end with Richard's conviction. The asset recovery process returned $847 million to various victims. Medicare got back $230 million. The Department of Education recovered $125 million. Defrauded investors received $300 million. And Victoria? The court restored every penny Richard had stolen from her, plus damages, nearly $50 million in total. Victoria didn't keep it all. She used the money to establish the Victoria Bennett Foundation, dedicated to helping survivors of financial abuse rebuild their lives. The foundation's first initiative was creating safe houses, not just shelters, but actual homes where women could stay while rebuilding their careers and credit. Financial abuse is abuse, Victoria said at the foundation's launch, her voice strong and clear. When someone controls your money, they control your life. We're going to break that cycle. The foundation provided free legal services for divorce and custody battles, financial advisors to help women rebuild credit destroyed by abusive partners, job training programs for those whose careers had been derailed, medical care for those whose health insurance had been weaponized against them. But perhaps the most powerful outcome was the Guardian Angels protocol, developed by Daniel and his veteran network. They created a nationwide system where veterans could volunteer to provide security and support for domestic abuse survivors. Not vigilante justice, but legal, professional protection during the dangerous period when victims leave their abusers. We spent years protecting our country overseas, Jerome Washington explained to Congress when they invited him to testify about the program. Now we protect our fellow Americans here at home. Every veteran who participates finds purpose. Every survivor gets a guardian who understands what it means to face an enemy. The protocol was adopted by law enforcement agencies in 30 states within the first year. It provided veterans with meaningful work that honored their skills while giving survivors the protection they desperately needed. Victoria returned to medicine, not as a surgeon, her hands still shook from the trauma, but as an advocate. She testified before Congress about coercive control laws. She consulted with hospitals on recognizing signs of abuse in wealthy patients. She proved that survival could become strength. Daniel remained in her life, not as a bodyguard but as family. He became Hope's godfather, teaching her to be strong, to stand up for others, to never walk past injustice. At Hope's 5th birthday party, surrounded by other survivors and their children, Daniel gave a toast. To the little girl who arrived in a storm but became sunshine, to her mother who showed us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it, and to everyone here who proves daily that the best revenge against those who tried to break us is to build something beautiful. The room erupted in applause. Victoria wiped away tears. Hope, in her princess dress, hugged Daniel's leg. Justice had been served, but more importantly, redemption had been earned. 5 years after that terrible storm, Victoria Bennett stood at the podium of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in Geneva. The woman who once needed permission to leave her own home was now addressing delegates from 193 countries. Financial abuse affects 1 in 4 women globally, she began, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience. It doesn't discriminate by income level. In fact, wealthy abusers often have more tools at their disposal: lawyers, accountants, connections. Today, I'm here to tell you that we can fight back. In the audience, 5-year-old Hope sat between Daniel and Rebecca Stone, now married and running a legal security firm specializing in high-risk domestic cases. Hope wore a small pin with her mother's foundation logo, a phoenix rising from storm clouds. The Victoria Bennett Foundation had grown from a domestic initiative to an international movement. Chapters in 40 countries. Safe houses on 6 continents. Over 10,000 women helped in 5 years. The Guardian Angels protocol had been adopted by Interpol as a model for protecting vulnerable witnesses. Victoria herself had undergone a remarkable transformation. She'd returned to medicine, specializing in forensic medical examination, documenting abuse cases for court proceedings. Her expert testimony had helped convict dozens of abusers who thought their wealth made them untouchable. "I thought my life was over that night in the storm," she told the UN Assembly. "But sometimes we need to lose everything to discover who we really are. I discovered I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And survivors don't just heal, we help others heal too." She'd also found love again, real love this time. Dr. James Patterson, a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma recovery, had met her at a medical conference. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. They'd married in a small ceremony with Hope as the flower girl and Daniel as Victoria's man of honor. "James doesn't control me," Victoria had told a reporter who asked about her new marriage. "He empowers me. There's a difference between protection and possession. One comes from love, the other from insecurity." Daniel and Rebecca's partnership had evolved into something beautiful. They'd adopted 2 children, siblings from a domestic violence situation, and built a family founded on strength and service. Their firm, shield and sword legal security had become the go-to resource for high-profile abuse cases. "Every case we take reminds us why we do this work," Rebecca explained in a recent interview. "Daniel provides the shield, protection and security. I provide the sword, legal action and justice. Together we ensure survivors can rebuild without fear." Richard Hawthorne's story had a different ending. 3 years into his life sentence, he suffered a massive heart attack in his cell. The prison medical team couldn't revive him. He died alone at 2 a.m., no family by his side, no friends to mourn him. His funeral was attended by exactly 3 people: the prison chaplain and 2 guards required by protocol. His billions had been completely liquidated. Titan Industries was dissolved, its legitimate assets sold to competitors, its fraudulent gains returned to victims. The Hawthorne name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale taught in business ethics classes, how greed and cruelty ultimately consume those who embrace them. But Richard's downfall triggered something larger. The publicity around the case led to congressional hearings on financial abuse. New laws were passed making economic coercion a federal crime. Banks were required to flag suspicious account restrictions between spouses. The Victoria Bennett Act made it illegal to disable a spouse's vehicle or communication devices. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Reports of financial abuse increased 400% in the 5 years following Richard's trial, not because abuse increased, but because victims finally had language for what they were experiencing and hoped that justice was possible. Dozens of other wealthy abusers were prosecuted using the precedents set in Richard's case. CEOs, politicians, celebrities, men who thought their money made them untouchable, discovered that the law had finally grown teeth. This story proves that no amount of money can protect you from karma, Victoria said, concluding her UN speech. Richard Hawthorne had $3.2 billion. He ended up dying alone in a prison cell. I had nothing but the help of good people. I ended up with everything that matters: freedom, family, and the ability to help others find their own light after the storm. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Hope ran to the stage and hugged her mother. Daniel wiped away tears he'd never admit to shedding, and somewhere in the audience, a woman trapped in her own golden cage heard Victoria's words and thought, for the first time, maybe I can escape too. The storm that had nearly destroyed Victoria had instead revealed her true strength, and that strength had become a beacon for thousands of others finding their way to freedom. This story isn't just about one billionaire's downfall or one woman's survival. It's about the eternal truth that power without conscience is hollow, and money without morality is meaningless. Think about it. Richard Hawthorne had everything society tells us to want: billions in the bank, a corporate empire, influence that reached around the globe. But he died alone in a prison cell because he never understood that real power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. On the other side, we have Daniel Rodriguez, a veteran with a military pension and a conscience. Victoria Bennett, a doctor who lost everything but kept her humanity, a community of veterans who turned their battlefield skills into shields for the vulnerable. They had no billions, no corporate armies, no political connections, but they had something Richard could never buy: honor, loyalty, and the courage to do what's right even when it costs everything. The storm in this story works on 2 levels. There was the literal storm that night. 60-mile-per-hour winds, freezing rain, nature at its most violent. But the real storm was the one Richard created through his cruelty, and like all storms built on hatred and control, it eventually turned back on its creator. Today, Hope Hawthorne Patterson is 15 years old. She knows her origin story. Born in a storm, saved by courage, raised by love. She's not ashamed of how she came into this world. She's proud of her mother's strength, grateful for Daniel's bravery, and determined to be part of the solution. Uncle Daniel taught me that real strength isn't about domination, Hope said in a recent interview for her school newspaper. It's about protection. Mom taught me that survival isn't the end goal. It's the beginning of helping others survive too. She volunteers at the foundation, plans to study law like Rebecca, and maybe serve in the military like Daniel. Or perhaps she'll become a doctor like her mother. Whatever path she chooses, she'll be another guardian in a world that desperately needs them. Here's what I want you to remember. Every survivor deserves a Daniel Rodriguez in their corner. Every abuser will eventually face their storm, and every story of courage, no matter how small it seems, sends ripples of hope to someone who needs it. If this story moved you, if you believe that justice should know no tax bracket, then you're part of this community. Subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries for more stories that prove love, courage, and honor will always triumph over money and power. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but building something beautiful from the ashes they leave behind. What would you have done in Daniel's position? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. This is the Penthouse Diaries, reminding you that every storm eventually passes, and the strongest towers are built by those who've weathered the worst winds.